How can you cope effectively and healthy with anger towards your mother?
Yeah, it's great to have anger at your mother. We all have to go through the process of differentiation. This is like a basic psychological process that ideally starts around age 10 and maybe wraps up around age 20. That's very rare because most young people, children, aren't really allowed by the parent to express their anger that is necessary for differentiation to happen. Now, when I say differentiation, one of the things it means is you're not going to become another version of your parent. The anger is necessary for us to have objectivity, actually. It's not like, oh, I blame my mother for everything in my life. It should be like, I'm angry because this is how she failed me and she could have done better. If we cut off everyone we ever had anger at, we would have no relationships. It's not bad or shameful to have that anger. It's necessary to help unlearn what we were taught by her failures. We learn cognitive distortions during that time about ourselves. It's necessary to then have that objectivity to unlearn, oh, that's not true. That was a mom problem. And as we do that for ourselves, we're liberated and we're able to now have that objectivity about ourselves. I just really realized, oh, young Bronwyn learned all that shame from when she was at the dinner table and it was dad and it was what he used to do. He used to close his eyes. He used to count to 20 like under his breath and his face would get really red. And it was about me and I knew that. But I realized that's where young Bronwyn learned that shame. And so I just closed my eyes and I did this imagination exercise. I closed my eyes and I imagined adult Bronwyn meeting young Bronwyn at the dinner table when she's 11. And we put all the shame she feels into a big cardboard box. And we just go, okay, let's give it back to dad because return to owner. This is his shame.
Did you also count under your breath to 20 in that visualization as you were returning the shame to him? just.
Oh my God.
Bronwyn Schwagert, welcome to the Naked Truth, a therapy podcast. It's your second time on our podcast. A lot of folks requested that you come back and answer some more questions. You are fabulous, and I would love to learn more about anger today, shame, and the gut, and how all of that's connected. So first, if listeners would like to listen to the first episode that you were on with us, it's episode 83, and you also have your own podcast. And I will never do the justice of introducing you. So I will let you tell our listeners a little more about all of the wonderful things that you do. And then we'll go into answering questions. Yay!
Oh, that sounds great. Thank you. So yeah, I am a licensed psychotherapist and I have my own podcast, which is Angry at the Right Things. And the goal is to get all these principles out to people who will never be my clients, but that they can hear them and apply them on their own. It's a lot of it is about anger and other fun feelings that no one else seems to really delve into, like shame, hatred, disgust, all the fun ones. So yeah. So thank you for having me back. It's fun to be back.
So I just want to breathe now because I'm like, so many different things going on in the world. And we're so angry at all kinds of things. But let's just talk about some of the questions that folks asked. One of the questions is how to deal with anger towards your mother as an adult. So as you know, parents can sometimes not do a fabulous job at being parents.
Yeah.
How can you cope effectively and healthy with anger towards your mother?
Yeah. So first of all, I just want to say that it's great to have anger at your mother. Psychologically, we all have to go through the process of differentiation from our parents. This is like a basic psychological process that ideally happens around age 10, starts around age 10 and maybe wraps up around age 20. That would be the ideal. That's very rare in actuality because most young people, children, aren't really allowed by the parent to express their anger. What differentiation? So first of all, I am a parent. I have a daughter who's 20. Did I screw her up? Yes, I did. And you know what? That's what humans do. We fail each other. So whoever asked that question, they're not unique. Of course they have anger at their parent. Of course my daughter had anger at me, even though I am a psychotherapist, even though I really, really tried to not screw her up. I did, because that's what the human nature is. Like, we fail each other. We don't know what we don't know. A lot of it is unintentional. Some of it, not so much, unfortunately. But yeah, so that is a good place to be, where you're feeling the anger at your mother or at your father, for that matter, because that is necessary for differentiation to happen. Now, when I say differentiation, that means so many things, but one of the things it means is you're not going to become another version of your parent. So the differentiation is necessary. The anger is necessary for us to have objectivity, actually. So it doesn't necessarily mean that the parent is all bad. And it doesn't necessarily, it's not like, oh, I blame my mother for everything in my life. It's not extreme. It doesn't have to be. It shouldn't be extreme. It should be like, I'm angry because this is how she failed me and she could have done better. It doesn't mean that we don't have a relationship with her necessarily. Now, right now, I don't have a relationship with my father. My mom's deceased. I don't have a relationship with my father. So that is one option, to no longer have that relationship. But it doesn't mean that necessarily to have anger. If we cut off everyone we ever had anger at, we would have no relationships, because all people feel one another. That we all do that. That's human. That's intrinsic to being a human. So it's not bad or shameful to have that anger at our mother. It's necessary to see her objectively, and then to help unlearn what we were taught by her failures. So, for example, if this person who asked this felt very rejected or neglected by the mother, in a particular way, chronically throughout her childhood or her life, it's necessary for her to say, yeah, that was really hurtful. And this is what I learned about myself. Because as children, we learn what we call like imprints. We learn, what cognitive behavioral therapists would call like cognitive distortions during that time about ourselves. So when a child is neglected, when they feel unseen or unwanted or unloved by the parent, they learn, oh, I'm not worthy of love, or I'm shameful, or I'm abandonable, and something like that. So it's necessary to then have that objectivity to unlearn, oh, you know what? Actually, that's not true. That's not true. That was a mom problem. That wasn't an Alicia problem, right? And that's the objectivity, is to go, oh, and that's what we can do as adults, and say, actually, no, mom really has this problem. Like, that is a mom problem. And to go through what I call an integration exercise with ourselves, where our adult self is speaking to that young version of ourself, our inner child, and say, you know what, young Alicia, I need you to know that mom's rejection of you was 100% a mom problem and 0% an Alicia problem. And as we do that for ourselves, we're liberated, and we're able to now have that objectivity about ourselves and go, oh, I'm not the problem. I'm not inherently shameful or bad or unlovable. That was a mom fail, right? And so all of that is really necessary to do. We don't need to confront the parent, because I know that's what a lot of people ask me about. They'll say, well, what if my parent's deceased? Or what if, she'll never hear me out or validate this? Well, that's actually, unfortunately, the case most of the time. And that doesn't mean we can't have closure for ourselves, because we can, when we realize, okay, to actually speak our truth and share our experience with that mother would be counterproductive, because she would push back, she would deny, she would defend, she would attack, whatever she'd do, she'd try to invalidate in some way. And that is true most of the time with most people, unfortunately. But we can have that closure for ourselves by just allowing ourselves to feel the anger, validating it for ourselves, and letting ourselves know, yeah, that's on mom. That had nothing to do with you.
I really love that you said you should thank the anger, almost as if you should be thankful that you feel the anger, because so many of us, again, and the imprint from childhood is that anger is bad. A lot of us were not allowed or punished for being angry. Feeling anger as an adult is such a uncomfortable feeling, right? It's like you try to push it, repress it, do something, distract yourself. You just never feel the anger because you were told it was so wrong.
Yeah.
So I like that you said, just kind of like express some kind of gratitude to yourself. Like, okay, like I'm feeling angry. Like, thank you for that. That means I'm alive. That means I am an adult. That means I'm recognizing that things are not as great as they need to be or what should be or I want them to be. Yes, my parents fucked up. They did this, this, and that. And okay, I feel angry. Okay, that just means I'm normal.
I view anger as a light on the dashboard of our emotional car saying, hey, something's wrong. Check under the hood. And so if we can start to shift and go, okay, we were indoctrinated to believe anger was problematic or shameful or bad. But you know what? Of course we were, because that kept us in line, didn't it? That served a purpose, right?
Yes.
And if we can start to shift and go, well, that was manipulative by the parent and it worked for them for a period. But, again, that objectivity, like anger isn't bad. It's a warning light. It's to get our attention. And we don't have to explode when we're angry. We can just say, oh, I reject that. That's not true. Or we can have a boundary, or we can be assertive, right? And that's what you do with anger. And if we can just shift how we view it, we can allow ourselves just to feel it in our body, I have a lot of clients with a lot of anxiety and panic. And, I want to really shift the title of panic attacks to anger attacks, because that's what they actually are. So every single client I have that tells me, I was having heart palpitations and whatever. I'm like, well, what made you angry right before that happened? And they're like, oh. And what they're doing is they're disassociating from the anger, which just means suppressing it.
Yeah.
And the minute they're like, oh, actually, I was really angry, but I didn't allow myself to be angry. And the minute we validate it for ourselves, poof, it's gone. No more panic, no more anxiety.
I think in the counseling therapy world, we say depression is just anger turned inwards, right? But I think you're right. Anxiety, panic attacks, like all of that is just some kind of emotion that we were not allowed to feel, and we learned to convert it into something else to make it okay. Because if you were punished for being angry, but maybe you were given juice or a cookie because you were having anxiety, well, then in your family system that was rewarded, and it was okay to have a panic attack, but it wasn't okay to be angry. So it's just such a fascinating thing of how does our brain convert things. And, there's the mind-body connection that we talk about all the time, but it seems like we constantly forget that even within the mind, the conversion can happen from one issue. It can convert it into something else just to disguise it as something a little more acceptable to your environment.
Yeah, and I agree with that. Anger, I think a lot of us learn to not be angry, not even because the parent is explicitly saying that's bad, that's shameful, but more implicitly, I actually believe so many people, when they were first differentiating, which is the terrible twos phase as a baby, that's a differentiation phase. And it's really an important phase of a development for a child. And I believe a lot of children, when they said no and mine, instead of the parent working with them to help them form their autonomy, the parent gave them silent treatment or, just ignored them or abandoned them in some way as a consequence to keep them in line and keep them from doing that. And so then their inner child learned, oh, if I show anger, I get abandoned. I'm left all alone. And that is scary for any child. That's way too threatening for them to ever express their anger again. And they go through life, even in adulthood, where anger is too scary because it's associated even unconsciously with abandonment.
And you also mentioned something about, that a lot of people will say to you, okay, I want to express this anger that I have towards one of my parents, but maybe the parent is deceased, or maybe my mom is just not going to hear me out.
Mm-hmm.
So would you say that it's better to try to talk to the person that you're angry with, or it's maybe better just to kind of like talk it through in therapy, or talk to your friends, or write it out in a journal, do it sort of by yourself?
Mm-hmm.
Which way would be, you think, better?
Yeah, it's rare that the parent will validate the anger. And I guess that's really up to the individual. If you really believe the parent is open to giving that validation, that could be very healing, of course. But if you don't believe that will happen, that could be very counterproductive. It could be exactly more traumatic to be invalidated when you're really being vulnerable and you've taken time and energy to share this vulnerability with the parent, and the parent's still gaslighting and still invalidating. That could be very, very hurtful. So I would leave that up to the discretion of the person, but ultimately the validation is what we need. So we can do that for ourselves, and we can find a friend or a therapist who will do that for us. And not every therapist is good at that, unfortunately, and not every friend is good at that. So sometimes with a friend, we just need to say, you know what? I'm going to read this fantasy letter to my mom right now. And what I need from you is just to listen and validate. I don't want you to defend my mom. I don't want you to say, well, Bronwyn, think about it from her perspective. I don't want you to do any intellectual work or make me think it through. I can do that on my own. I just need to express my feelings, and I need those feelings to be validated. Once we have that and we feel that validation, we use the word express, right? Express is like literally expressing that anger or that disgust out of our bodies, externalizing it. And once we're validated, it's gone, and we're no longer haunted by those feelings. And that is the end goal. Mm-hmm. So if that doesn't look likely with the parent, I wouldn't attempt to do it with the parent.
It's so very cool that you say that, expressing it, letting it go, and that it's, that's very healing to people. And then I talk to a lot of people that will say, I'll ask about how's their relationship with their parents. And a lot of people will say, well, they did this and this, but they were really good parents and they did this, this, and this. It's almost like it feels always to me like people are so defensive of their parents. And it's almost like they don't allow themselves to feel that anger or that disappointment. They almost like rationalize it and create this bubble around this childhood, and it's almost like they want to protect it, and they want to protect the image of their parents, and you're right. I think a lot of people will end up expressing it as panic attacks because that is socially acceptable. But anger, then you have to like come to grips with, well, maybe I am angry at my parents. Maybe they did really do some shitty things, and maybe that would make them need to look at that for what it was. They did this, they did this, they did this. But a lot of people just shift very quickly from, it's almost like they don't want to see. They want to protect their image of their parent or their childhood and keep it under protection because I guess maybe allowing yourself to see what your parents did to you somehow would open you up to saying like, oh, wait, I am pretty screwed up. Maybe this is wrong. Maybe that's wrong. Yeah. And maybe that's just so vulnerable to people that they would rather protect that image, keep the parent on a pedestal and keep saying like, well, they did, they were not that bad. They did this, but that's okay. I turned out okay. I'm fine. Meanwhile, they're sitting here having a panic attack after panic attack, depression episodes, anger episodes, but they will still protect that image I don't know what it is about, that loyalty,
Yeah.
you know?
Yeah. When you're talking, Alicia, what comes to mind for me is I think it's that black or white, all or nothing thinking. Like, if I admit the truth, I will have to cut them off and never see them again. Like,
Right.
it's very extreme thinking. I think that's what underlies that invalidation of their experience, that inauthenticity. I think it's this extreme, like, if I admit the anger, I'll never talk to him again, and
Mm-hmm.
they're going to die alone, and I won't be at their bedside. Like, and once we can snap out of that and go, okay, that's actually not true. That's not how anger works. That's not how it's designed to work. There's so much nuance. There's this huge spectrum. We can feel anger. I'll give the example. About a year and a half ago, I started connecting the dots on how I had failed my daughter. It was kind of a riddle, actually, because I really tried, but I did fail her. When I fell into my own depression about, 15 years ago, she was 5 at the time, and she felt very, very rejected by me. And, as I got better, our relationship never got better. It never healed. It was never restored. And she was around age 5 or 6 at this time, and she rejected me for the rest of our time, like our life together. It was almost like she became a 14-year-old at age 6 with me. She just, all of a sudden I flipped, and I knew I flipped in her eyes. Like, I became her enemy, really. And that actually made my depression worse too, because I was feeling rejected by her now, and it became this big, downward spiral. But about a year and a half or 2 ago, I started connecting the dots as a therapist, like listening to my clients, and I started realizing, oh, Edie, her name is Edie, she was rejected by me. She felt rejected by me, and I need to apologize to her. And I wrote her a letter, actually, at the time. It was called Dear 5-Year-Old Edie, and it was an apology letter. And I said, I need you to know that I know you felt rejected by me, and I need you to know that that was 100% a mom problem and 0% an Edie problem. And I wish I could do that over, but I'm doing it over now. Like, please forgive me, and I just really laid it on the line. And our relationship has done a 180, and we are like so close now. I had to earn back her trust, and it took not just that letter, it took time too. Of course it did. But I was willing to do that. Because I'm okay with, like, you know what, Edie, of course you can be angry at me. Of course I failed you. That's what all parents do. That's the human condition. And if you become a parent, you're going to fail your kid too. So get ready for the apologies now, right? And so if we can kind of have that mindset of, instead of this black or white, my mom's all good, or she's all bad, my kid's all good, or they're all bad. If we can get away from that and just live on the human 3-dimensional spectrum, we all hurt each other. We all fail each other, but we can own it. We can apologize. We can move forward. And anger doesn't mean that that relationship is over either. And just kind of see that spectrum and that nuance. I think we can be authentic, and we can be honest with each other and with ourselves.
Well, first of all, you're a wonderful mom because you were able to have so much insight about what could have happened. But what if someone doesn't have a mom like that? What if that mom is, maybe not willing to validate at all? And I know you kind of talked about it a little bit before, but and you talked about the inner child. And so how would someone maybe do some exercise with either their inner child or some kind of technique to help themselves get that validation, maybe without mom being involved, because maybe mom doesn't have that awareness of that level of insight.
Yeah, no, I can give another example. So my mom had none of that awareness or insight. And my dad, who I have cut off now for about a year and a half, doesn't either, unfortunately. So I spent a lot of time thinking and talking about shame and what shame does to us. And a few years ago, I was running, and I had this epiphany while I was running. I just really realized, oh, young Bronwyn learned all that shame from when she was at the dinner table, and it was dad, and it was what he used to do. He used to close his eyes. He used to count to 20, like under his breath, and his face would get really red. And it was about me, and I knew that. And his objective was to make sure I knew it was about me. It was how I was eating. He had this weird OCD about how I'd eat, and if I didn't put my fork down after every bite. It was about how I talked. He'd always tell me my tone was off and I couldn't ever get it right. And anyway, but I realized that's where young Bronwyn learned that shame. And so I was at a stoplight. This is so funny, on my run. And so I just closed my eyes and I did this imagination exercise. And on my latest podcast, I talk about this because I want the listeners to do this for themselves. So this is an example of that. I closed my eyes and I imagined adult Bronwyn meeting young Bronwyn at the dinner table when she's 11. And we put all the shame she feels into a big cardboard box. And we just go, okay, let's give it back to dad, because return to owner. This is his shame.
Did you also count under your breath to 20 in that visualization as you were returning the shame to him? just.
Oh my God.
I can't believe that adults would do something like that, but that's the thing. It's like adults are kids themselves a lot of the times, and they are stuck, at some weird developmental stage, and they have all kinds of issues. And then they're raising kids and giving us their issues and more shame. And it's like, oh my gosh, what a cycle.
Yeah. Well, they're mainly stuck at the toddler developmental stage. But yes, you're right. So I just gave the shame back to my dad and I said, hey, return to owner.
Yes.
This is yours. It's always been yours. It was never mine to begin with. And that unleashed something in me. So what I know now is that shame abides in our gut.
I know what you mean.
And you know what shame is? Because we also feel disgust in our gut. And I realized shame is a form of self-disgust. And so, of course, it abides in the gut. And so when I gave the shame in that exercise back to my dad, something in me cleared. Like my gut was free for me to reclaim for myself. And I've mentioned that I'm, racially, ethnically Jewish. In the Hebrew, the ancient Hebrews used to believe that what we call the soul, the better word would be our essence or our being or our core. They believe that was actually in the gut. It's an embodied. So it's not soul like a disembodied soul. It's actually an embodied essence, and it's in the gut. And when I took that shame and I gave it back to him in that exercise, it was like my gut was free for me to reclaim. And something really powerful shifted in me where I'm like, now when people try to shame me, I don't feel shame, which is self-disgust. I actually feel disgusted at the person who is trying to shame me. And I'm able just to laugh and go, we both know I'm not the problem here.
Right.
And I just have this like inner intuition, this gut instinct now that I can have that objectivity with everyone who wants to shame me, just like my dad's intention was to shame me, right?
Well, it's also really amazing that nowhere in this exercise you needed your dad to be present there physically. You imagined, you pictured this, and you were able to, and our mind works in images so much and in visualizations, and we don't realize that we have so much power, and that what you just did was so powerful, because you can take all that shame that you got and you can return it to him, and you feel like there's something leaving your body, but you didn't even need your dad to be there. How powerful, right?
I didn't need my dad to be there, and what the fruit of it was, there was a lot of fruit. But one of those fruits was that I was disgusted at him, and because he's still doing the same thing today. And I was able to have that objectivity and go, oh, because when we feel disgust and we stop feeling the self-disgust that isn't true, but we feel the actual disgust at someone who is so manipulative and gaslighting us like that, then that disgust, it's there for a reason. Just like the anger is there for a reason. It's a warning. It's to say, ooh, stay away. Like if you had a little child and you were walking down the street and you saw roadkill, you wouldn't say to the child, don't feel disgusted. That's a bad feeling to have, because you want them to feel disgust because it naturally repels them. It
Protects them.
right, to protect them. So that disgust is there to give us vital wisdom and information. And so once I had that freedom and that objectivity with my dad, and I did feel disgusted that he's still doing the same things, I was like, I can't have a relationship with you until you stop doing that and you apologize.
Wow. I don't even want to ask if he ever did. It sounds like he never did. He's not capable of the higher level adult functioning and admitting that some of it's like, come on, dude. Like,
it's so sad. I think that's another thing shame does. I think like to him to own his failures, he feels like it would annihilate him because shame is so like it annihilates us, right? Whereas when I owned my failure of my daughter, it was so liberating. It wasn't easy. I'm not going to lie. It wasn't easy. Of course, it took a lot of humility, but humility is not the same as humiliation. Those are two distinct things. And when I did that, it was liberating, and it was every bit worth the effort, because now we have this reunified relationship, and it's worth whatever price, So yeah, it's really all a matter of perspective, isn't it?
And I think for a lot of people, it's about, if I admit that you had an issue with me because I was doing something, I was this father that was doing this, and I admit that was wrong of me, and I apologize to you, then by default, I'm telling you that I'm wrong. And for me, being right is so important that I will never admit that I did something that may have been wrong. It's almost like people assume that one thing that they may have made an error with will somehow take them away, will make them disappear because that one thing was wrong. It's like, no, like it's not all or nothing, but it's just
because shame tells us when you make a mistake, you are a mistake.
That's right.
Right?
That's
shame
right.
says you messed up, meaning you're all bad.
Right.
So it's so black and white.
Right.
That people who deal with shame can't just see themselves as humans, and we all make mistakes, and we learn from our mistakes. That's the goal.
I really love how you say that, the soul was kind of perceived as being in the gut, because so many people, and that's, I always think about it. It's like we're this huge puzzle, this complex being, and we take whatever emotion is not allowed to be expressed at home, we take it and we convert it into something else. So it might be a panic attack, might be a headache. A lot of the times kids will have tummy aches or some kind of a gut issue, right? So like when I was a kid, I had these mysterious problems with my tummy. And I would always say, it feels like somebody's squeezing like a rope around my tummy, and it's just being squeezed, My mom would take me to doctors, and they would, all do all kinds of tests, and there's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong. There's nothing wrong, right? But there was something, right, that wasn't allowed to be expressed in the childhood home. And so I couldn't feel safe to say or do whatever it was. So I started having gut issues, right? And to this day, I can look perfectly composed, but my gut is just stuck, just feeling converted, just convulsing in there, right? Because I wasn't allowed to express maybe fear, maybe anxiety, maybe anger, and whatever it was. So now it's like my gut feels it all, but I'm perfectly calm.
But our gut is where we feel disgust. So little Alicia was disgusted.
Well, funny that you say that.
By her parents' behavior. Go ahead, but I have something more to say about that when you're done. Yeah.
So, I've done some work, and unfortunately or fortunately, I discovered that I have sexual abuse that was completely dissociated from my life. I've not known about it, right? So it's just, so I've discovered that recently, and there's still some work to be done, obviously, so that disgust is probably there because I felt so much disgust and so much shame, so it's still there.
But the disgust, yes, right. So the shame is self-disgust, and when someone is disgusting and we don't have that objectivity, we feel the shame.
Yes.
And what little Alicia needs to know is she's not shameful. That's actually disgust at her abuser.
Yes.
And it's also probably discussed at the parents who allowed for it to happen.
Right.
Of course,
Right.
because that's the ultimate betrayal.
Yes.
But that belongs to them, not to her.
Yeah. So I hope one day I'll stop carrying it.
All the clients I've had who've had any kind of bulimia from their earliest years or early years, they all feel disgust at their parent, usually at the mother in particular. The clients I've had who binge and have, binge eating disorder, a lot of them started pretty young. They were actually feeling disgust at one or both of their attachment figures, their parents. And then I have other clients who just overate a lot, so more of the binge eating. And those felt very empty in their gut because they felt very alone and neglected. And I really see how, we say the mind-body connection. I don't even like that.
It's just mind-body.
All one. It's not even a connection. Yeah, it's just us.
Yeah.
It's just our essence, right? We're all just one big essence. So yeah, I see that actually a lot, that we feel that disgust in our gut. And as we're able to go, okay, I objectively feel disgusted. This isn't shame. This isn't self-disgust. This is disgust. And this behavior is objectively disgusting. And we can validate that for ourselves. It clears up.
Okay. So I'll do an exercise on feeling disgust and I didn't consider that before. So you're right. I think that is probably what I never was allowed to feel, disgust.
Well, and I think we naturally feel that self-disgust. We turn it in on ourselves as children. And so, yeah, I would lead you in an integration exercise or have you do an integration exercise where, adult Alicia's speaking to young Alicia. And she just says to her, young Alicia, I need you to know what I know now. And I need you to see that you're not shameful. The person who did this to you is shameful. And the parents who, allowed this environment to happen are shameful. And let's just give all the shame back to them. And we can feel from this point onward, we can let ourselves feel disgust when people are acting in ways that are wicked.
Return to sender. I like that exercise.
Return to owner.
To owner.
Yeah.
So there's one more question here. The question is, how can someone deal with the realization that a parent was and still is emotionally unavailable? So possibly in an alcoholic family, or maybe the parent was physically there, but emotionally they were not. And whatever the reason is that they were emotionally unavailable. What if, you realize this as an adult, that they're emotionally unavailable?
Yeah, I think that's important to come to that conclusion because a lot of our parents are emotionally unavailable for lots of different reasons, mostly shame, that they learned somehow at a very tender age themselves that emotions are shameful, that they can't be vulnerable because shame shuts us down, right? Shame makes us not trust ourselves. So going back to the gut, what shame does is it severs our ability to trust ourselves, to listen to our gut. It severs that. And it kind of makes us into like a robot of sorts where we dissociate from our feelings and we kind of feel like we have to be this perfect robot that can't ever make mistakes, right? It makes us kind of like unhuman, actually, when I think about it. But yeah, so we can't trust ourselves. We can't trust our gut. We can't be true to ourselves. We put on a mask. We pretend. And if we can see, yeah, my mom or my dad or both, they have a lot of shame, and I can have compassion for their inner child. And that's not mutually exclusive with a lot of anger and disgust at who they are now. Those things are not incompatible. We can feel the whole gamut of feelings all at one time. So we can feel love and empathy and hate and disgust and anger. We can feel all of those. We're not robots. We are humans, and humans are messy, and feelings, we just feel them. We don't judge them. They're not right or wrong or good or bad. And I'm kind of getting that place about my mom now where I have a lot of empathy for her inner child, but I also have a lot of disgust for her adult self and what she tried to teach me and, implicitly the way she treated me. And that's a great place to land, that where we have that level of complexity to really see things as they really are, to live in reality and not denial. That allows us to do that for ourselves and for others. And that's really the goal, is to be integrated in that way.
And as you're speaking, and I think a lot about dissociation, and how powerful our brain is, because when abuse happens, a lot of the times the kids, will dissociate so perfectly that we will not even remember that it ever happened, right? And then we carry that on. So it's like, how do you even heal from shame, disgust, and some of these things when you don't even have a memory of what really happened to you,
You don't need a lot of memory. You really don't. You just need like an emblematic memory. So, I tell clients, just pick something that is emblematic, that really represents everything. Just pick that one thing. Let's do an integration exercise with you at age 7 in that one emblematic memory that really is representative of everything mom did, in a way. And let's go for it. And that does it. That's all we really need.
Very cool. Thank you for being out there and doing all this important work with people.
Yeah. Thank you.
All right. So a question from a listener. Sometimes I feel uncomfortable with my mom, even if she hasn't necessarily done anything in that particular moment. But based on things she has done in the past and made me feel in the past, I feel uncomfortable now. How do I deal with that?
Yeah, I really like that question. How do you cope? First of all, you don't cope. That sounds like a CBT therapist. We don't learn to cope. Her underlying resentment is a good thing, and it is there for a reason, and it's valid, and it's telling her something. It's her body's way of communicating to her, I don't really trust this person. I don't really trust her, or, she's lost my trust, or I just have this resentment at my mother. And that's not something to learn to circumvent or push away. That's a really important feedback that her body is giving her, that her emotions are telling her. And that's something to attune to and say, okay, why do I feel this resentment? What's this all about? Maybe it's time to go to therapy and unpack the resentment. Or maybe it's right at the surface and she knows exactly what the resentment's about. But it's there for a reason, and it's there for a purpose to say, it's time to live in reality and not dissociate. And, we're going to need a boundary with this person that we feel resentment with, or we're going to need to tell this person we feel the resentment with, hey, I actually resent you because this is what you did in my childhood and you're still doing it now and you've never taken accountability. So yeah, we don't want to cope with that. That's the key.
That's perfect. And I think, so many people, that's what exactly they do. They kind of try to pretend that feeling is not there. They try to pretend as if, everything's fine, but they just start to feel something in their gut or somewhere in their body. And then they feel like something's wrong with them because whatever happened was so many years ago. So they should somehow find it in themselves to move on, and they can't, still there.
Yeah.
So it sounds like acknowledging, first of all, what kind of things are going on within yourself. And then maybe you can't tell your mom because she won't validate it or won't understand it. But maybe you do sign up for therapy or process that in some other way. But you don't deny yourself the right to feel the discomfort if that's what you feel.
No, that feeling is there for a really good reason. And it's there to give you insight and wisdom with how to move forward.
Beautiful. Bronwyn, just thank you so much for being with us today here and sharing your wisdom. And thank you. We're so appreciative of having you here. And we hope people tune in to your podcast where you speak more about everything we just touched on today.
Yeah, thank you for having me back, Alicia.
If you could remind us where everyone can find you, that would be fabulous as well.
Yes. So my podcast is Angry at the Right Things, and you can find it wherever you subscribe to your podcast.
Very good. We hope that you will come back again. We're just going to make this at least, once a month venture. We'll just have you come back all the time.
Oh, thank you so much. That's such an encouragement to me.
Thank you so much.
Okay, you're welcome.
Thank you. Talk to you soon, Bronwyn.
Okay.
Bye.
Sounds good. Okay. Bye.
Bye. Perfect.